Hello and welcome to another video. So I asked you if you wanted some videos on ghost stories in London, and I've got a few of them coming up over the next couple of videos. So this one today, we are looking at a small location in London, and that is Tower Hill and Tower Station and Tower Bridge. Now they're not all linked, but some of the, well, it is sort of linked, it's all in one little area, but it's all surrounding obviously the Tower of London. But I'm not going to touch on the Tower of London itself because that probably deserves a video of its own, and it's covered a lot, and I want to cover more the lesser known ghosts and maybe poltergeist activity around the edge of that area. So here we go. So the first one we're looking at, and that is Tower Hill. So something I didn't know, and to be honest, I've worked in London over the years and been to London many times, and we come in via Fenchurch Street and often go down to Tower Hill. And even when I worked right by Tower Hill and I used to walk around and go for my lunch, I never knew this spot and what it really meant. And that is, as you walk past what I call the Fenchurch Street exit of Tower Hill, and you walk round to the main exit of Tower Hill tube station, there's the Monument Garden, what I always used to call the Monument Garden. It's got the big buildings on it. It's called Trinity Gardens. Now in Trinity Gardens there is a square area that's got concrete posts around it, or stone posts around it, and that is the actual spot where all the executions happened from around about the 1300s to 1780. 1780 was the last execution there. Now over the years, some stories have sort of come about, and one of the people who was executed there is said to haunt that area. So a little bit more about the spot. So from around about the 1300s, around about 125 people were executed on this spot. Now most of them, I don't know if I do struggle with YouTube, okay? So we're talking about ghosts and history. This is British history, and a part of British history is the way we execute people back in history, and that is by lopping their heads off now and sticking them on poles. YouTube's not going to like me talking about that, and there's a word that we use a lot when we talk about them, and if you ever see 60 Musical, it's actually in the title of some of their songs about who survived, who had their and all that stuff. But let's just cut to the chase. The people who were executed were headless by the end of it. So we're not allowed to say that B word, apparently. So around about 125 people lost their heads on that site. Now, over those years, there's some pretty famous people that this happened to, and some of them seem to have not have left that area. One of the recent ones was actually a Uber driver. Now the Uber driver was parked up on the fence just on the outside of Trinity Gardens, and he happened to be by the gap where you could look over to where the spot was. He was parked up there sitting in his car waiting for his next pickup, and he just casually looked over and was looking over at the Tower of London in the distance, and you see what he described, and I guess quite accurately, was a headless man walking around by that spot. First of all, knowing that area and knowing a little bit of history of London, he knew what that spot was. He just thought it's a reenactor, it's a tourist thing, you know, just on the other side by Tower Hill Station you got the Jack the Ripper tours where they all meet and start. He thought it was just a little person having a laugh and scaring a few people. This is in the middle of summer, so it's quite plausible. Then the figure moved closer and closer to him, and he realised that he could actually see through the other side of this person. Obviously this was a bit of a shock to him. Rubbed his eyes to make sure he wasn't seeing things, and the figure was walking around trying to, almost as if he was trying to find something, which is quite a key little point and a clue to who maybe this ghost belonged to. In 1535, Sir Thomas More was executed on that spot. Now, one of the stories that we have is that Sir Thomas More wasn't great friends with Henry VIII, and Henry VIII felt he betrayed him, and he got executed. Basically, Henry VIII wanted him to Sir Thomas More to say he was the greatest king ever. And what Thomas More's last words were, "I died the king's good servant, but God's first." Now, this infuriated some people, but the executioner then begged for his pardon. And it seems that the delay in were they going to let him go or not may have triggered some emotion that has left an imprint in that area. So Thomas More's ghost is said to be hunting around the area, not just there, but in other areas of London and around the Tower, looking for his head. There is a little cliche that I was going to say, but I'm going to say it anyway. A few years later from this report, another person see two figures that were headless in that area. He turned around and said, "I wonder if they actually talk to each other." My response was, how can they? They've not got no heads. But poor joke, but yes, poor joke. We have another gentleman who was actually one of the first that we believe to be executed on that spot. This was Simon Sudbury. Now, he was actually Archbishop of Canterbury at the time. This was 1381. Now, what triggered this was actually the Peasants' Revolt. Ironically, Fobbing just up the road where it all started with Thomas Baker, when they met up with Wat Tyler who come over from Kent, and they joined up forces and it all went wrong in London. But they broke into the Tower of London and took Sudbury out and dragged him over to Tower Hill and executed him there. Now he is sent to haunt that area. The problem is, on this one, we know it was in that vicinity, but we don't know if it's actually on that spot. So the other ghost that we have isn't quite on that spot itself, but further on. Now this will be where the big memorial is there now, the big white building. You do see it in some of the videos I've taken here, and it was a lovely night. I mean, the moon was out, and yeah, it did look quite creepy when we was walking around there, if you could cut out all the traffic noise. But Simon Sudbury's ghost is said to haunt around that area, maybe even coming across by the car park area, more towards where the Tower Hill station is itself. And people are said to see a gentleman, a poor looking soul, looking as if he was being dragged or being pulled towards what would be his execution. Now this has been reported by a police officer. So in 1980, a police officer said that he'd seen a ghost there of what he thought may be Simon Sudbury. Now, well, it's quite confusing because a lot of these people that we have on this list are people that are all meant to haunt somewhere else as well. But this is where they met their death. Robert Howells was also executed on that same day with Simon Sudbury. So he was also pulled out from the Tower of London. I think he was the King's Accountant or something like that. So another person that we have who's meant to haunt that area is actually Anne Boleyn's brother. And this is George Boleyn. Now this was in 1536, the day or 2 days before Anne Boleyn's execution. Now of course they were accused of adultery and doing things between brother and sister. I'm not sure YouTube would like me to use that word, but yeah, that's what they were doing. Well, reportedly doing, quite important there. No, Henry VIII was like. So he was executed on that spot, and the story I have of him is, I guess, quite sad. Now George Boleyn's spirit or ghost is said to be seen either from between where the execution point is in Trinity Gardens right away round to the entrance to the Tower of London. Now this would have been via one of the gates that is, I believe, if you come through Tower Hill Station, there is a gap in the floor there where you can look over at one of the old Roman gatehouses, or medieval gatehouses, sorry, that was a medieval gatehouse there, that he would have tried to get through. Anne Boleyn was still being held captive in the tower, and she wasn't executed 2 days after. And it is believed that the spirit of her brother, or the ghost of her brother, was trying to get back over to the castle to try and save her. His soul hasn't been able to rest since. Now obviously Anne Boleyn, as you know, has got links to Fobbing as well. Her father owned Fobbing Hall. We've all got links to Anne Boleyn in Thurrock, and there's why a lot of rumours about where was her heart or her head buried. Was it buried up at the Bell in Horndon, or was her head buried over at Fobbing? Now, as we know, I do believe that her head has been found with a body that they believe to be Anne Boleyn by now. Now, there is a plaque at Trinity Gardens that does list a few, and it is just a few of the names of people that were executed on that spot. Now, the last two people were two women, and they're the only two women ever to be executed there. So it's quite easy to narrow down that who these two ghosts may be. So in 1941, just during the Blitz, or near the end of the Blitz, when the main bombing happened, an area warden was rushing around that part of the area trying to get people into shelters and down at the tube stations, when he ran across that part of the area where Trinity Gardens is. And remember, at that time it wasn't looking how it looks now. He was running across there. There's two ladies standing on the grass. He's calling over to them to take shelter, take shelter. They were ignoring him. He ran over there, and as he got close to them, they turned round, and he said they had ashen faces, and he tried to grab them to bring them to the air raid shelter, but his hands went straight through them and they disappeared. He stepped back in shock and couldn't believe what he had just seen, but later on he'd retell that story to somebody else. Apparently someone else has seen them over the last few months, and what it seems is that the war that was going on maybe disturbed some of that ground there or something, because there was a lot of reports of strange happenings around there. You had air raid wardens saying they'd been pushed along that ground area. Now this is something that is still reported today, that people walking through Trinity Gardens all of a sudden feel as they've been pushed. Now keep in mind that when these executions were happening, there was a crowd around about 50,000 people all gathered around the area trying to watch. Could this be something that's left over, some sort of leftover energy of this pushing and shoving to try and get a better view of these executions? We look at Tower Hill now as basically what it does look like now, forgetting that in the past all those buildings wasn't there, and it was a hill where the execution was on the high point and everybody could gather around and watch. Apparently the actual scaffold that stood on that point was actually quite rickety, and people would often fear that they may die before they actually were executed by falling off of the scaffold. Just on a side note of this, so obviously I have a passion for history as well as the paranormal stuff. Me and my wife, we went there and I was filming this video, the footage you see, and three people come along. It was a man, lady and a young child. And the young child come over and he jumped straight onto the scaffold point. And I was like, do people realise that people have been executed on this? This is British history. And it really got to me, and it shouldn't do. This poor kid had no idea of what that area was. And I was saying, 125 people have been executed on this spot. Loud enough that they could hear, and I actually quite embarrassed myself. Lucky enough, it was only my wife who actually heard me say it all. But yeah, I guess when you've got a passion for history, when you see it not being respected, it can get to you, especially like when it's something that is quite important. Now, it's a royal site. Now, well, it's not a royal site, because if it was royal or an ex-king or queen, you was executed within the tower walls. If you wasn't, you was executed on that spot. So it's completely wrong to say it's royal. But moving on, we're only going to go a little further now, and that's the Tower Hill Station. Now, Tower Hill Station has always intrigued me, and as you come out of Tower Hill Station, the quickest way to find the Roman wall in London is to walk out of Tower Hill Station, because it's just there in front of you. And then as you walk through, so you've got a little walkway that goes under, where there's that medieval gate tower leading towards Tower of London. And that was actually one of the gates in the city wall in medieval times. But the best thing about Tower Hill is the ghost stories. And that's because they're all from police or train guards or the station staff, which for me gives a little bit more credibility to the reports. So one of them we have in 1985, there's a station guard pulled over the barriers to stop people from coming in and out of the station because the station was closing. When he turned around, there was a lady, he said, in sort of like ragged clothes. And he says, "Excuse me, darling, we're shut. Can you leave the station?" And she ignored him and carried on walking. And he walked straight through the wall of the side of the station. Now, going by her dress and her manner, they believe that she was obviously not of this time and was a ghost of somebody that passed away there years ago, before any of that was even a station platform that would have allowed her to walk freely across that area. The next one we have is from a British transport officer, which is quite ironic because when we started Paranormal, Phil was actually in the British Transport Police at the time, and I wonder if he ever heard of this one, and if he watches this video, I hope he lets me know. So, British Transport Police officer, there was some things going on around the station, and they closed the station, and they pulled the full metal gates over, so it's shut off, so you can't actually get into that station at that point. When a gentleman in a proper old-fashioned suit, bowler hat and umbrella come up the stairs, now this is the walkway stairs of Tower Hill Station, and walking out towards where the barriers was, he shouts out, "We're shut, what are you doing on here? We've cleared out the platforms." The gentleman ignores him, walks straight through the metal gates and keeps walking. Now obviously passes through the metal gates as if they're not there. The transport officer turned to his friend, who's also completely white, and said, "You've got as white as a ghost. Have you just seen the ghost like I just did?" And of course they agreed that they did. This also backs up a station staff who repeatedly see this gentleman in a bowler hat and a suit and an umbrella walking through the station platforms as if it's just a normal day and leaving work. Now, I'm sure over the years maybe a lot of people have lost their lives in that station that were going to or from work, and it looks like this person's soul hasn't left that area. Also, one of the common reports we have around Tower Hill Station is a feeling of being pushed, brushed aside, or feeling that somebody is staring at you and there's no one around. Many females get this feeling. Late at the night, they're coming home from a club or something like that. They're getting onto the train. There's one particular area where this is, and that is as you come out of, say, the main part of Tower Hill Station, and there's a little walkway and go up the steps to, I guess, as if you can go to Fenchurch Street. But on that little walkway there, females have often felt as if they're being pushed to the side, or even at some point felt as if they've been pulled to the ground. Some people, ladies that have fallen over there, say they've been purposely tripped, or some literally grabbed them and pulled them down to the ground. Another interesting thing we have is the ghost of maybe a rough sleeper, which is the first time I've really heard of this, especially around London anyway. So in this area of London, unfortunately, you can't fail not to see the rough sleepers, and it's really sad. Now they sit there asking for help and some change or food. On the corner of where, ironically, there was a gentleman sitting, I couldn't film it. I didn't want to film him. You may catch a glimpse of him in this video. But where he is sitting, over the years, people reported seeing a hazy figure of a homeless man sitting in that corner very, very late at night. And when they've gone over there to see if he's cold or see if they can offer him something, as they get closer, he actually disappears. They sometimes think that he's moved and they walk around the corner to see if he's gone. Others have said they've seen him literally disappear in front of their eyes. If it is a ghost of a rough sleeper, it's not out of the realms of possibility. People did pass away and do pass away sleeping rough on the streets in that area. Now, of course, we can't talk about this part of London without talking about Tower Bridge. As we know, Tower Bridge is the most iconic building in London. Now, you've got three of them really: Big Ben, Tower of London and Tower Bridge. They are probably what makes London, and then as you go a little bit further out the river, you've got St Paul's Cathedral. They are our icons of London. Tower Bridge, obviously they're rumoured of quite a few deaths while it's being constructed. Bottom part of Tower Bridge, some say it was a morgue. If so, that would explain why there's a lot of interest in paranormal groups around the area for that spot. Underneath Tower Bridge, people often feel as if they've been pulled, tripped, very much like at the top, but also say that the paranormal activity is more violent down there, as they get scratches on their arms or they feel being forced up against the wall. Now, could this have something to do with the type of people that were placed into that morgue? We don't know. What I do know is the level of reports on top of the bridge seems to be increasing. Now, over the last 40 years, Tower Bridge has always been an interest for me, of being British and being one of our main iconic buildings. So I've always looked into the history of it, and just had an interest in location. And I remember looking up the ghost stories years ago about Tower Bridge, and there wasn't many. Over the years, more and more have come to light, but I'm just going to repeat some of the earlier ones and then tell you more of the recent ones. So I know I'm not very good at setting the scene for making my videos creepy, and this one I guess is more of a history based one, but this was 1931. It was really foggy, and I guess back then we used to have what they call like the pea supers, where it was so thick you couldn't really see in front of your face. A local bobby is walking across the bridge, where he sees a man standing roughly where the bridge would open, if it was to open up for traffic, for river traffic. He walks up to the gentleman and he stands there having a chat. The gentleman is there with what the policeman calls a Sherlock Holmes pipe, and says to him, it's not a nice night to be out. At this point, the policeman hasn't actually seen the face of the person because it's just a figure in the fog and they're getting closer. But he just engages in some short conversations. The gentleman's there with a big hornpipe, and the officer says to him, "If you don't mind me asking, sir, what is your business tonight?" And the gentleman turns around and looks straight at the officer. The officer reports that the gentleman had piercing red eyes and no facial features, and then steps backwards into the fog where it becomes so thick the officer actually lost sight of him. The officer gathered himself for a few seconds and then rushed forward to see if he could see where the gentleman was. And as he rushed forward, the fog slightly parted and he could see right way down towards Tooley Street, and there was no one across that side of the bridge. Now that is pretty creepy, I would say, if it wasn't for the fact that as he stood there and looked down the bridge, he turned round and the gentleman was standing right behind him. The policeman said there was no way he could have got around him without him being seen. But the officer turned around and looked again straight into these bright red eyes. The figure then immediately disappeared in front of him. Now, I'm aware that at the time people tried to link this report to Spring Hill Jack. Now, Spring Hill Jack is maybe a myth of a demon or devil that was meant to jump over walls and rooftops of London. And I guess this does fall into that category with the bright red eyes. But again, at that time, 1931, that is the people tried to link it as the story that was to explain what actually had happened. In 1960, a couple of American tourists reported that they were walking onto the bridge from the Tower Hill site. And as they started walking up the pathway, there was a gentleman standing in front of them that sort of hesitated, then sort of gathered his pace and walked in front of them, about halfway over towards the first section of the bridge. This just before you get to the big two towers. But these tourists were walking along that pathway and the gentleman was in front of them, around about 4 or 5 steps in front. And so as you're walking across there, it can be quite busy at times. And as you see in the videos, it was very busy the night that we were there. The gentleman then just steers slightly over to the right hand side to where the edge of the bridge is, and then disappeared out of view. Their first instinct was that he could have jumped, but then realised that actually he wasn't close enough to the wall for that to actually have happened, but he turned towards the wall and disappeared. They said they had eyes on him, he did not go over the edge, he just disappeared from that part. Apparently they reported this back to a couple of other tourists along there and a tour guide who joked that it could have been a ghost at that time. What is reported that lone females do often feel pushed or as if something is behind them, making them travel faster over that bridge. mainly again on that first section as you enter from the Tower Hill side, walking up towards the other side of the bridge. One of the other locations on the bridge to look out for, as you start walking up on that right hand side of the bridge, look out, you'll see these lampposts. One of them isn't a lamppost and it's actually a chimney. Around about that spot there is where we have what is meant to be a ghost of a lady. She is seen sobbing, leaning over that area. Now I don't believe that area actually hangs over the water. I think it's more towards the Tower of London side. So she's seen sobbing over that bridge, and anyone who goes up to sort of comfort her to see she's okay feels a real cold breeze and then she disappears. Again, this is quite a common one, so we've had reports from the 80s, the 90s. The last report I have on her is in 2020. It's not long ago at all. Talking of recent reports, I've got a very recent report that only happened summer this year. So in July this year, and this comes to me from one of the members on here, that sort of inspired me to look at maybe doing some London ones. Him and his friend were having a drink on the other side of the bridge, and they'd been there for quite a few hours, and it was now getting late. It's actually now nearly 1 o'clock in the morning. They knew that the only way they was going to get home was to get over to the underground stations and get a tube back over to Upminster and see if they then could get back to Thurrock that way. They walked up and joined the bridge from the other side of the river, to the street side, and started heading across. Now the first thing that they said they spotted that could be a little bit strange was a white mist going across the bridge. Now they were not alone on this bridge. They said there's around about 20-25 people still walking along that bridge. It's still busy. They believe that other people see this mist in the middle of the bridge, and one of the guys says that he actually sees people pointing out to that mist in the middle of the bridge, which is probably not out of the realms of possibility. Now it goes over a river, it could be fog coming up, it could be smoke from something, we don't really know. As they got closer, some figures appeared out of that mist coming towards them. One of the guys describes it as a really poorly dressed gentleman. He said all his clothes seemed to be like tattered, torn, or even like covered in soot. His instincts made him think it was maybe a homeless man that was coming up to him to ask him for some money. He actually put his hand in his back pocket to get out some money, just in case there was going to be a confrontation. He didn't want to get into that at this time of night. As he got his money out and he turned to look at the gentleman just rushed straight through them, and this figure passed straight through both of their bodies, leaving them icy cold and stunned. Both looked at each other without a clue what had just happened, and instinctively they started running. They're running and they got closer and closer to where the mist was when another figure come out. This figure seemed to be running directly towards them. And I guess if you ever seen the film Frighteners, the way he describes it to me reminds me of the jogger in Frighteners when he runs and he pushes past people. He said this figure ran straight through the middle of them, but as he got to the middle, it was like a false, and he pushed them to the side. The figures carried on sprinting down the other side of the bridge. But what we can't ignore with the Tower Bridge is obviously the age of the building and maybe the history that goes along with that and how things have changed. There is an old Victorian myth of London. Again, we've got the Spring Hill Jack, and we've got the thing that mustn't be named. Now, this sounds like something out of Harry Potter. But apparently there's this entity around tube stations in London and certain areas of London, a spirit or being that people see or feel that they can't name, they can't describe, it's just there. Tower Bridge is one of those areas where back in Victorian times and up until the 1920s and 30s, that this thing is said to be seen around Tower Hill and Tower Bridge mainly. Again, this would cause things to happen. This would make people fall off their bikes. It would make horses rear up and refuse to go across the bridge. It would even make people feel physically sick. And again, there was no real description of what this is. It was just something that people just knew it was there but couldn't see it. It was just an entity the negative energy that seemed to affect everybody that was in that little area. So in the 1970s, we have a group of workmen that are doing some road works on the first section of that bridge. Every time they were doing the work, they felt sort of lightheaded, a little bit foggy-minded, couldn't concentrate on the work they were doing. They were putting it down to maybe it was some sort of chemical in the ground that they was digging up, some gas they were exposing, and they were taking turns to go down and to do the work. Then they went for the break. Now this you've got to remember, when I used to do this years ago, you used to put the hut over the hole and a cup of tea and all that in there. So they were in their hut, or what you want to call it, a tent, having a cup of tea, and all their work tools are just on the side by them. And they said that all of a sudden their work tools seemed to start rattling. Now, being as this is coming up onto a part of a bridge, vibration, I guess, could be quite normal. He said, but their pickaxe stood directly upwards. I can only imagine what they thought was going to happen when a pickaxe stands up straight in front of them, and the worst outcome possible. They run out the tent, and they said the pickaxe come flying out of the tent and went actually over the bridge area of where they were. Lucky enough, no one was standing below. I take this with a pinch of salt. Could they have dropped that pickaxe and come up with an excuse of how it managed to go over the other side of the bridge? When I was reading it, that's what comes to my mind. Oh yeah, you nearly killed someone with a pickaxe down below, and you're making up an excuse saying there's a ghost up the top. So I take that with a pinch of salt. But, you know, I guess when you talk about paranormal, anything's possible in it, really. What you can say definitely is that Tower Hill area and Tower Bridge area is beautiful, especially if you go there at the right time of night. It looked lovely, and yes, it does have a creepy feeling about it. We know a lot of people lost their lives around there, and we know a lot of people have lost their lives off the bridge as well. So I guess there is a residual energy on the bridge and in the area that could, I guess, if people in tune with their senses or emotions can get pulled into that, and maybe their mind can play tricks on them. But no, I hope you like this video. I hope you like my photos and the filming in this video. And if you don't like my video because of what I've said, like it because of my photos, because I actually think they're pretty good. And my filming I thought was pretty good on this one. Maybe a bit dodgy in some parts, but I've got 1, 2, 3, 4 more locations coming up of London. I may do them in 2 videos, I may do them in 1 video. I'm not sure yet. But thank you for the support. I've decided that I'm going to try and aim for 7,777 subscribers. We're on 2,500, something like that at the moment. So my target is 777. So that is what I'm going to try and push for on subscribers and see how close we can get to that. I'm really enjoying making these videos at the moment. I really enjoy talking to you, and the information you're giving me is just fantastic. I love it, and you're providing me with evidence as well. So you're not just telling me a story, you're giving me factual stuff to back it up with, you're giving me the history stuff to back it up with, and I love that. And again, the appreciation, it's really hard for me to say how grateful I am for the support that you've all shown me. And yes, if you like it, subscribe it, share it, hit the notification bell, and I'll see you in the next video, which I hope will be really, really soon. Thank you. Bye.